Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our live town hall on this beautiful Friday afternoon in Vancouver. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pamela Martin, and of course, I'm joined here by Peter Milobar, who is seeking the leadership of the Conservative Party of British Columbia. So, Peter, this is such an exciting time to be a Conservative, I think, in BC.
Absolutely. The membership's been growing. That's what we hoped for when this race started. We have a lot of great candidates for people to choose from, and we're in the final hours of people to become a member so they can have their say in the vote in the end of May.
Right. But of course, this race is about more than just the leadership of the party. It's actually going to determine, in many ways, the future of our province, I think. I think it's very easily whoever becomes the new leader could become the next premier.
I would agree with that. I mean, we know the NDP will put up a fight. They're not going to go down easily. And we know that they get, 37% of the vote before they try doing anything the day of an election. So there's still a lot of work to be done for the party, for the leader moving forward. But this is an exciting step to get us in that positive direction to actually grow the party and then have that volunteer base to have a successful general election as well.
Right. Okay. Well, right now, as we all know, British Columbians are facing some really major challenges: rising costs of living, growing pressure on our healthcare system, concerns about public safety, and a sense that government really isn't delivering the results that we all expect in our province. So this is a moment where we need really steady, great leadership with practical solutions and a clear vision for the future. So those of you who are joining us out there, this is your opportunity to hear directly from Peter, find out his priorities, his values, and his plans. And it's also a chance for you to ask questions of him. I will be asking questions, but I also encourage you, if you have a question, please submit it online. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce Peter, which we've already met, of course. So I guess why don't we start with the really big issue that's on almost everyone's mind, which is what to do about DRIPA. What's your plan?
Yeah, I want to be really clear on this. I campaigned in 2024 in the general election as a part of the BC Conservatives to repeal DRIPA. And it has become more and more apparent over the last 2 years that DRIPA simply is not working. It needs to be repealed. And we need to recognize that that is not any way racist or anything like that. It's just simply saying it's government legislation that is not working. It's creating a lot of uncertainty. So we need to repeal DRIPA. And then at the same time, we also have to be defending private property rights in court, specifically the Cowichan case as it moves into the appeals court. But any and other court cases, including future ones, we need to make sure that the government lawyers have been instructed to defend indefeasible title on private property to the full extent of legal arguments that they have available.
So you would just completely repeal it?
It needs to be completely repealed. I mean, this is, again, yet another mess that the Premier has created. He's admitted as much by saying that it has to be, his latest version is to pause it for 3 years. Well, if you have to pause it for 3 years, and we know we have court cases that are going to take longer than 3 years, you're admitting that it's not working, that it's created legal liability for everyday residents and businesses within British Columbia. So let's just cut through all the BS of that side of it and actually just repeal it and say it wasn't working. It's created legal ambiguity and problems, and we're going to reset the relationship.
Okay. So, and just to be clear, because I want to also ask you, since I have said publicly that I'm supporting you, people have brought issues forward to me and asked me, well, what does he think about this? What does he think about that? And one thing that came up was people have said, well, Peter's wife and children are First Nations. Would that have any impact on your decision?
No, and for some people, it's like they think that they've cracked the Da Vinci Code. I've never made any secret that my wife and my kids are Indigenous. I've been married to my wife since 1993. It's not going to impact the decision around DRIPA. we had a conversation before I ran for the BC Conservatives about what was in the platform. John Rustad and I talked about DRIPA specifically, and I knew that that was going to be part of the platform before I agreed to run with the BC Conservatives. And so I've backed it up and I've demonstrated. This week alone, we should have been having a confidence vote around
That's
DRIPA,
right.
which would have brought government down in the middle of a leadership race. I was very prepared to do that. As the only member of this race that has a seat in the legislature that would have actually had a vote on that confidence matter, I was prepared to put any personal ambition of leadership aside and try to bring the government down at the first opportunity. And that would have been centered around DRIPA. So I'm not sure how much more I can demonstrate that I mean what I say when it comes to this.
Well, and I think that's a very important point that you just touched upon, that you are the only candidate who's actually elected now, sitting in the BC legislature, ready to lead, as your sign says, your tagline. And it's true. And that's very important because, anyone else who's elected is going to have to take the long road of getting a nominate, finding a riding, being nominated, running in that election, etc.
Yeah, and that does make a big difference. In a case where the premier only has a one-seat majority, where the speaker has to break ties, where we do have that very real opportunity on confidence votes to bring the government down, having an extra seat majority that the premier would get by creating a by-election and having an MLA resign and creating that empty seat for the better part of a year, essentially guarantees the NDP the ability to govern until the fall of 2028. And that creates a big problem in terms of what we're seeing happening in the overall economy. And we need to keep that pressure on because, as we saw earlier this week, they're hanging on by a thread, but only if we actually have enough votes in the House to pull that thread and trigger the election.
Right. Okay, well, moving on to some more topics because, of course, we have a lot to talk about. David Eby has plunged us into the largest deficit in BC's history. It's really pretty scary, I have to tell you. As a citizen, that's how I feel. So what can we do about it?
Yeah, there's a lot we can do about it. It's going to take a lot of years to get us back to a balanced budget. It took 16 years the last time, and the books are in worse shape. Now, I don't think we need to take 16 years, but we definitely need to have year-over-year plan, and we actually have to be committed to fiscal discipline. And so I've been talking all along, and for the years leading up to this race, even that even if we found a 2% efficiencies within government, so we're not closing schools, we're not closing hospitals like the NDP will try to fearmonger, that would save $2 billion a year right there.
So just finding efficiencies within government.
Within government, excess bureaucracy, excess management. In healthcare alone, we have 3.8 employees to every one manager. Ratios that just don't exist in the private sector. And so there's things we can do that wouldn't impact those frontline services people are receiving while still actually just saving that little bit of money and having some fiscal discipline. But then we actually have to grow the economy in a meaningful way. And so you need to budget for what the economists think will happen in the economy. And you need to instruct your ministers and your cabinet to actually exceed that expectation, because it's that exceeding of the mediocre projection that will actually give us that boost to our overall economic growth that then gets us back to where our revenues are coming in faster than the spending growth. And that's how we eventually chip away at that deficit. So it needs to be that two-pronged approach. You cannot cut your way out of the situation that the NDP has created. You need to cut, but you also need to actually have strong economic growth.
Well, and so let's talk about the other really big issue facing our province, which I think is healthcare. Obviously, we know that emergency rooms are closing across the province. People are on waiting lists and, losing their lives sometimes waiting for treatment. We don't have enough doctors. I mean, it seems like an insurmountable problem.
It really does. And again, the NDP have created the problem. I'm trying to figure out ways that we can solve these problems. And so, when the NDP took government, there was a $17 billion healthcare budget. It's now 40. So, 2.5 times the budget being spent. I would suggest not 2.5 times better outcomes. And it's around the decision-making and thought process and ideology the government has. And an example I'll give is around seniors. We have a shortage of long-term care beds. The seniors advocate has pointed that out. This budget, they cut 6 long-term care facilities out of the budget. Now, that was ideological. It was because they say they didn't want to spend 1.8 million a bed, which is too excessive. I agree. But the private sector would do it for 600,000 a bed. They just don't want the private sector to do it. And why that's a problem is you have seniors languishing in acute care rooms in hospitals. It's not a good standard of care. It's not a good standard of living. It's hard on the mental health of the senior. And it also creates full hospitals unnecessarily, which means people are in the hallway. And then that means when the hallways get full, people back up the emergency room, which leads to the emergency room waiting room having 12-hour waits. And so instead of getting rid of the bottleneck issue, this government's actually making it worse. And so it's that type of problem solving that I want to bring to the table in the Premier's office and filter through to the cabinet to actually resolve some of these areas without necessarily having to spend more money. In some cases, we could be spending less, but actually get better patient outcomes, better healthcare outcomes when you think of that whole patient flow through a hospital improving by simply finding appropriate better housing arrangements for seniors.
Wow. Well, would you allow private healthcare in BC?
Yeah, I think we have to really push the limits of what's allowed under the Canada Health Act, and we have to push the federal government to re-examine what's in the Canada Health Act. So I'm very mindful, and I always have trouble just giving, I say, either clickbait or rage bait type answers. It works well on Twitter, but there's always a lot more depth and complexities to what you can legally do. And being elected as long as I have, I'm aware of what those complexities are. And so I feel the voter and people need to have that honest answer on these issues. So we absolutely need to push to have as many services that are deemed elective and would fall into that provision to be properly actioned. We need to actually look and see what the fee structure is for those private spaces. And whether or not the fees that the government's willing to pay truly reflects what it costs the healthcare system if it's in a publicly run hospital. And what I mean by that is if you're going in for a procedure and we're willing to pay, just use a round number, $1,000 to a doctor to do it in a private clinic setting, and the hospital is actually $4,000 or $5,000 to put a patient through. We have to look at these private spaces operating because we're not making it economically viable for them to operate. We're backing up the hospital, and it's still costing us much more money. So I think we just have to look at that whole system and say, again, not about the patient paying, but where is the highest and best use for throughput for a lot of these procedures and the overall cost structure to government and to ultimately us as a taxpayer to get better outcomes while still actually making sure it's a publicly funded healthcare system.
Right. But and we also have an extreme shortage of doctors. We need to find a way to bring more doctors in. I know SFU is opening a medical school, but that's going to be, take a long time for those doctors to be available.
Absolutely, and there are solutions out there. We could be looking at accrediting universities outside of Canada to their standard of training, and say if you're a student that went from K to 12 in BC, has their dogwood, we've invested in them as taxpayers in their education. They go to a medical school somewhere else in the world that we accredit, then they should be able to come back and pick up as if they just graduated from UBC at that equivalent graduation point and finish off their last couple of years here. So that's an easy way to welcome our kids back into the province. But there's other things that doctors are asking for with government. They're asking for help when it comes to charting and better use of how to make that workflow go so that, according to them, it would free up the equivalent of 1,500 doctors in the system.
Wow.
Now, let's say they've wildly overestimated that. Okay, that's still 750 doctors back into the system. So there are ways we can listen to the frontline people, GPs, nurses, specialists, and actually make those improvements in the healthcare system with that quality of care and patient outcome top of mind as the deliverable that we need to actually achieve, and figure out how best to rearrange that $40 billion to actually achieve that outcome.
Well, it's certainly a gigantic topic. There's so many different things we could talk about, but I'm getting a lot of political questions. So I guess we should go into those, which is people are wondering if you are a true conservative, that you, or are you just BC Liberal 2.0?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think we have to be clear about the history of British Columbia politics. The reality is, right of center parties have always been heavily federal conservatives with a healthy dose of federal liberals mixed in that share an underlying principle around, private sector economy and strong growth, safer streets, better education for our kids in K to 12, making sure that the healthcare system is working well and government's getting out of the way, and safe streets. And so I've always said, if you share those core principles, you're more than welcome under a party that I would be the leader of, BC Conservatives. I ran as a BC Conservative for the years with the Bennetts out of Kelowna. It was the Social Credit Party. Then it became the BC Liberals, and now it's the BC Conservatives. And I think if we get into this contest of who is the bluest of the blue of the blue, frankly, we will not form government. We need to have that broader spectrum and space for all those opinions. And I think there is a space for those what would be considered farther right voices and opinions and policies and concepts. That's what a healthy, broad-based political party has. And I welcome that. I've been in caucus rooms, both BC Liberal, BC United, and BC Conservative, where those viewpoints were being shared. What I hear in a BC
People, though, are concerned that maybe the BC Liberals will take over. That's what I'm hearing. Take over from the Conservatives.
Well, I mean, yeah, I understand that concern, I guess, to a degree, except 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, there was only 500 members of the BC Conservative Party. So the reality is, if you were a right of center voter, if you were right of center politically minded enough to buy a membership in a party provincially, you were a BC Liberal. And so, we have to get past that, because I can tell you, as a former BC Liberal that is a federal conservative, 85% of that membership were federal conservatives. If people are wondering why there was such a push to change the name from BC Liberal to BC United, or whatever name we landed on, it was because those federal conservative party members had had enough of voting next to the word liberal. And so, again, we have to, if we want to have that overarching goal of defeating the NDP provincially, we have to get past what the name on the ballot is and look at what were fundamentally core principles of the broad base is. And that's what we really need to focus in on, because if we just focus in on who can be the most conservative by any one person's definition of what makes a conservative, we will not win this election.
But how do you do that? How do you get people to feel like they're included, their opinion matters? And, because, like there's a question here from Barbara, what is your relationship with the current BC Conservative caucus?
Yes.
And people are worried that, it'll just be a big fight, even if you're elected leader.
Yeah, and again, I'm the only one in this race that's been elected since 2024 in the BC Conservative caucus. So I've worked with that caucus day in, day out for the last year and a half. And I feel I have very good relationships with all. And whether they're endorsing me or supporting me or not, we still work well together. I was just at an event before this where there was MLAs there that were endorsing other candidates, and we got along fine. We were having good conversation. We were on stage together. There's none of that type of, we're being adults about this in terms of how leadership race run, and that bigger picture of making sure we're holding the NDP to account. And so I do recognize, though, especially those that aren't, and also sound self-serving, but those that aren't in caucus yet, it would take time to try to figure out what those interdynamics are of personalities, and it's a lot of new people in there in terms of newly elected and working together. But as I say, I think we have found a very respectful way to share those broad base of ideas, to work together, to see the bigger picture. And really try to advance the things that really are meaningful and impactful to British Columbians in their daily lives.
So Donna wants to know, how will you deal with the One BC party?
Well, One BC, I mean, they're their own party, and I respect the fact that there's people out there that want to rally around that party, just as people want to rally around the NDP or the Green Party. I would not just default to saying there's no way we can survive a vote split or anything like that. I would hope that as a party, as we come to this leadership race, we can demonstrate to the right of center voter, the vast majority of them anyways, that we are the viable option, that they can see themselves voting for us, and you attack it that way. And then you have to make sure that you're aware of which ridings a vote split might be more problematic than others.
Mhm.
You make sure that you have a little extra volunteer help, you have some extra voter ID,
Mhm.
some extra ground game to those specific ridings.
Real grassroots politics.
Exactly, and to counter any potential vote split. And we have to remember the Greens are going to be vote splitting the NDP. So you have to wait to see what the makeup in each of those ridings look like with candidates and strength of candidates are putting in to figure out your final strategy pieces around that. But frankly, defaulting and saying I would walk away from 5 ridings right now, that will never happen. We need to run a full slate of 93 candidates if we want to be seen as a true governing party in waiting.
Mhm.
And I would commit to making sure we have candidates in all 93 ridings, and move forward in that capacity.
Okay, well, let's go back to the economy. We have a question from Maureen who says, how do you plan on attracting new business to increase our revenues and be a more business-friendly province? Because we obviously have a lot of economic issues to deal with.
Well, and that ties into the DRIPA repeal in terms of the bigger projects, in terms
Mhm.
of we still have a constitutional duty to consult, not consent, but consult. And so we would have to live up to that in a good faith way, and set out very clear timelines in terms of how projects are going to be reviewed, and not keep moving the goalposts of what those timelines are. So that will help bring a bit of certainty, a lot of certainty actually, into the investment climate. Nations, Indigenous nations will know exactly what the ground rules are, what the timelines are, and so everyone's being treated equitably and with good faith. And I think that will go a long way on that side of it. But then we also have to look and make sure, where are we at with the regulatory burden to small business, to light manufacturing, to people trying to upscale, to put in new equipment, and really expand their business. So we have to make sure we're competitive on those tax structures that would attract that type of investment. Because when we're losing all these young people out of our province right now, if they're at a workplace and they don't feel like the owners are trying to expand or improve or modernize, and they're just hanging on by a thread. You think what that conversation with your child at dinner would be like. They'd be like, well, I don't know if we're going to have a job in 6 months or not, versus, yeah, it's pretty exciting. They're expanding and I'm hoping I can move up into the next level in the company, or they're going to open a branch office and I might become a supervisor or a manager there. It's a completely different conversation. And so that's what we have to reinvigorate in the economy, is that kind of entrepreneurial
Mhm.
investment spirit across the board, so that people see that there is hope and there is expansion of the economy overall coming.
Yeah, and hope is such an important thing to bring back to this province. I do feel that people are without that. We need inspiration, Peter. We need someone to inspire us. Well, what about your position on energy projects, on pipelines, on working more closely with Alberta? Is that something you would do?
Oh, absolutely. I think we absolutely need to work with Alberta. I fully support the pipeline. I've always supported natural resources coming from Kamloops. It's still heavily reliant on the natural resource industry, but so is our tech sector that we've developed in Kamloops. A lot of it is tied to the natural resource sector. It's not the CGI like you would have down in Vancouver when you think of tech. It's more of the technology around mining and forestry and natural resource extraction industries. And there's a lot of technology that goes into that. So I see a lot of benefit to both sides of the economy in terms of the technology and professional services, but also just the boots on the ground that are mining and oil and gas. So we need to get our products to the open market. We need to get them to Tidewater. That's how you get true international pricing, and that's how you help the national economy, but also the British Columbia economy actually continue to grow in a way that we need.
Hmm. Okay. I had a question here and it's gone, but how do you, I guess I have been asked by people, he's from Kamloops. I mean, what about the downtown business core? Do you know them? Do you relate to them? Do they know you?
They know me. The interesting thing is I've been our finance critic for the last 4 years,
Right.
and so that makes you connect in with the business groups down in Vancouver and the builders and the developers and the financial institutions. So absolutely, I think I'm actually unique in this race in that I am from the interior. As I said in my previous answer, Kamloops is still very much a resource-based economy in terms of a lot of the spin-off spend from mining and forestry and the actual the frontline workers in that respect. But we've actually developed our technology sector, our professional services economy, and so when I go into a resource town and I'm going to meet at a mill, the Carhartts I'm wearing I took out of my closet and I put them on. Everyone else, frankly, when they land in that city, they're going to a Mark's Work Warehouse on the way to the mill, and they still have the crease lines on their shirts, right? You see the typical politician picture, right? So I walk into those resource towns with authenticity because I understand exactly what their challenges are. But I can walk in and throw on my suit and walk into a boardroom in Vancouver, especially with being the mayor of Kamloops for 9 years,
Hmm.
and have those conversations, and they do know and they respect that I understand what they're talking about. I understand what their needs and their concerns are, and I understand what an urban resident is needing for their life to feel better. When I go
Hmm.
in the northern communities, I don't hear everyone asking for a SkyTrain. They're realistic and pragmatic about what they need is specific targeted help for their communities to thrive, which is completely different than what we need down in the lower mainland in
Hmm.
terms of that densified mass transit,
Hmm.
mass infrastructure type
Affordable
thing,
housing.
affordable housing. Yes, different style of construction, right? As I'm doing this, I look out the window and I can see all the skyscrapers and communities in the north and the interior just don't have this same style of living. And so I fully understand that. I understand it's a different style of building and need and I would suggest no one in this race understands how the interplay between a municipality and the building community works. I have 15 years of municipal government experience under my belt, and I understand how development cost charges work and community amenity agreements work, and the complexities of trying to shift those around and what that means to the existing homeowner. So
Hmm. And
again,
you've done it all.
that level of experience does matter when you're talking
Hmm.
about having those relationships in
Hmm.
downtown Vancouver, having those discussions. So.
Right. And the resources that you talk about, that is really the engine of our economy. So it's critical to understand it from being out in the interior, not just being in Vancouver downtown.
Well, absolutely. And here's the real world consequence. When you have a mine application held up for an extra 5 years in a
Hmm.
permitting cycle, it's just not the mine investment that is a problem. It is also that smaller community nearby. Does the older motel, does that owner go to the bank and say, I want to renovate and upgrade?
Right.
Does somebody go out and buy a franchise like a Tim Hortons or something like that for the town? Does a builder, a local builder, think maybe I'll actually finally start building on those empty lots I've sat on for 20 years?
Hmm.
All of those investment decisions are held up for 5 years as well, while the province is dithering right now, trying to make a decision whether a project should go forward or not. And so that's the type of incremental growth you see in the economy when you're just being decisive and making decisions in a timely fashion.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's move on to another topic, which is education. I know a lot of people in BC are nervous about SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identification, and the state of our K through 12 education in the province. So, and lack of grades and all kinds of other issues. So, what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that SOGI, as it sits right now, needs to be repealed. Again, I campaigned in 2024 to do that. We've even heard the NDP education minister reference that they need to review SOGI because they know
Mm.
things are not so going so well within it, and it's become a flashpoint.
Hmm.
And
And some
so
parents don't necessarily agree with it.
no, they don't. And what we've seen is some teachers, not all, some have really focused in on age-inappropriate learnings in their classrooms, things that are making parents very uncomfortable, students very uncomfortable. And so, we just need to recognize that, take a step back, and recalibrate the length of time and how the instructional hours are being spent in the school, because we're seeing ever diminishing instructional hours. We're seeing a decrease in the results on numeracy, on literacy, on science grades in school. So we have to say, hang on, should we be worrying as much about creating social activists, or should we be worrying a little bit more about making sure the fundamentals are being taught within the mix of instructional hours we have? Now, I want to be clear, we need to protect kids. Kids have their charter rights just like adults do. And so we need to make sure that we still have robust measures and training in place around anti-bullying and anti-harassment. And that's in regard to anything, gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, all of that. The kids need to be protected and feel safe.
Absolutely.
100%. But we do have to actually recognize that as we're having fundamental core subjects continuing to decline, we need to recalibrate how that system is working at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And you would bring grades back?
I would bring letter grades back, absolutely. I believe it's important. There's too much gray area, and we're hearing already that kids that thought they were doing a little bit better in a subject than they were based in those 3 bands of descriptors get to the letter grade stage of their career, which is what universities start to look at, and that same time frame, and suddenly they're realizing they're not a low A, they're a low B, and they get panicked because they realize they didn't have the level of learning that they thought they had or understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to give them that clear line of sight, and we need to be challenging those that want to excel like we used to actually be lifted up. And those kids that are struggling need that support. And instead of bringing the curriculum down, we need to elevate things and elevate those kids that need that help, so that we can, find ways to spark their best potential as well, instead of just defaulting to making the curriculum easier.
Mm-hmm. Right. So here's a question from Bob. Seems like the NDP just talk and have actually no idea on how construction works. Any thoughts or ideas on how to improve housing for young people? Because I know we all are concerned about our children, how will they afford housing in British Columbia, actually, not just Vancouver, but.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into it, and so there's a lot we can do within housing. Again, my experience as a mayor, when I came into the mayor's chair in 2008, it was right when there was the housing crisis, and we took steps to change how we calculated development cost charges, when we collected them, things that we could do with the building community in unison to get government out of the way. And still get those units built. And we managed to maintain a reasonable level of building, even though the rest of Canada and indeed the continent was really slowing down. Mm-hmm. So there's ways we can help on the cost side, which actually does not cost government any taxation. It's just really stripping back some of the rules around step code and freezing it at step 3, so you're not adding extra costs when you go to step 4 and 5 for no real emission profile change. Things like in-stream application protection and making sure there's a true one fast-flowing permitting system, because time is money. If you're sitting on a very expensive piece of land in downtown Vancouver or Surrey, every month, every year that goes by before you're in construction, there's all that carrying cost to the bank that gets added into every unit's price. We need to take care of those. We need to actually have a proper infrastructure program in conjunction with the federal government, so that we can bring down those infrastructure costs of new development, which is adding, $75,000 to $100,000 per door, just to get water and sewer and roads.
Outrageous.
So right, and we literally just had the federal government agree to $8 billion to Ontario for that very thing, to bring down the cost of housing. BC is nowhere to be found in that conversation, partly because we have no financial wiggle room because of the way that these books have been handled, but also because the Premier doesn't know how to have a good diplomatic relationship with the Prime Minister. I think we all know the Premier has already said that he can't stop the pipeline. So we know he will likely flip-flop on that like he has done with everything else. So
Mhm.
how about flip-flop with a $5 billion infrastructure tech attached to it with the federal government, so we can actually get some improvements in housing and core services for municipality, while at the same time acknowledging the inevitable that the pipeline, if the federal government wants to see it proceed, will actually proceed.
So use a little bit of leverage, you're saying.
Yeah, use some leverage, part diplomacy, part leverage. Danielle Smith is a good example of that. No one will ever say she's not conservative.
Yeah.
No one will ever say she doesn't take the federal government behind the woodshed, so to speak. And she certainly is working with the federal Liberal Prime Minister right now to get a pipeline built for the benefit of her province. And so we need to do that. We need to defend BC's interests against the federal government when appropriate, and we need to work with the federal government when it's also to BC's benefit at the same time.
And not clash with them, but
Well,
get
yeah.
along with them.
Yeah, get along to a degree. Like I say, you have to defend when
Yeah.
it's appropriate to defend. Federal priorities are different than provincial, and I'm sure there's always going to be the occasional thing that, you look at equalization transfers. I don't agree with how those are calculated in that. So you have to work with the federal government to try to figure out how to make those better, and it's a working with while pushing against at the same time. And that's, I think, the key piece to all of this is not. I don't worry about how you vote federally, because I'm not there, as an MLA to try to be the premier, to pick federal fights on either side of the ledger. It's really about focusing in on what taxpayers are quite literally paying me to do, and that's worry about BC and the BC economy and what's going on in BC. We have MPs on both sides of the aisle that can go to Ottawa and fight fights in Ottawa. We need a premier and a cabinet focused in on defending BC's interests, full stop, regardless of who the prime minister is, who again will have that national view of things. And we need to bring that provincial view to the table at the same time. And that's where I say, regardless of how you vote federally, if you believe in those core principles of safe streets and better schools and better health outcomes and yes, repealing DRIPA and resetting our economy, those shared goals and principles, it doesn't matter how you vote federally. We need you on board as a provincial BC Conservative so we can form government. Because if we don't form government, you and I are back here in 2 years talking about things going wrong, instead of talking about things that we've made improvements in and things that we still need to adjust and advance moving forward.
So quickly, would you repeal the NDP's speculation tax?
Yeah, the speculation tax is interesting because the NDP just audited themselves on it, and yet again, they can't even run a tax properly. So, again, right now, for those that don't know, the speculation and vacancy tax has more delinquent taxation uncollected than they have collected. And they try to put liens on people's properties, and the people have already, by the time they get around to that, the people have already sold the property, so they can't put a lien on it. It's a tax that was supposedly going to create housing and put money into the housing fund. It's collecting way less than they ever thought it would. It has not created the units of housing that they say. They can never actually show us what study they're actually using to quantify how many housing units they've actually so-called created out of this. And in this budget, they've actually cut housing out of this budget. Housing projects that were getting started have now been removed out of the budget. So it's not even funding. They're not building what they said they were collecting the tax to fund in the first place.
Right.
So it's time to recognize that it's not working, and we need to just say enough's enough. We're spending way too much money, and the net benefit is just simply not there.
Right. So I don't know how much more time we have, but I wanted to ask you about safety. I think British Columbians really want to have a sense of safety in our streets to be restored. A question from Maureen: how are you going to deal with repeat offenders? So what are your thoughts about safety?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we have to do. We have to bring consequence back into the system. And that means we would need to have more Crown prosecutors, more judges, and actually look at allowing police to actually lay charges like they do in other provinces around this country. So that's one piece of it, so that we don't have this this rampant chaos that we're seeing on the streets, where it is literally the police arrest somebody, they recommend charges, the Crown says, no, we're not going to advance charges, and that person gets released immediately, and it's like nothing ever happened. And then we also need to address the whole situation, both with the federal government in terms of length of sentences, and what exactly it is we're trying to drive towards with that. And so, for some of the cases, the sentencing guidelines are already there, and they're okay in terms of what would be considered smaller crimes, and 2 years less a day, provincial. I don't think we have to do a lot with the federal government on that. We need our own provincial Crown Prosecution Service to have the capacity to be told, go ahead and advance charges and take this to court. And then on the more serious things like fentanyl trafficking and very serious violent crimes, I think we do have to press the federal government and say, look, fentanyl is not like drugs of the old. We need to actually have stiffer and more severe consequence for fentanyl dealing and drugs of that nature compared to, if you were dealing pot back in the 70s, right? The societal
Right.
and consequence, the health
Very
consequence,
different drug.
completely different, right? And there's no way the dealers don't know the consequence. And so we need to actually press the federal government to have more on that side as well, on the law and order side. And I think we can get there if we're, being rational about it and reasonable about it, but demonstrating that clear case as to why we need some of these federal guidelines to change as well.
How do we deal with this drug problem on our streets? I mean, it's really horrendous, as you know, and it's not just, in parts of Vancouver. I know many other cities around the province have, terrible situation, unhoused people, and the core problem is drugs.
Yeah, and when I say the downtown east side, I fully recognize, sadly, this is happening in communities across the province. It's just the easiest reference point for people to know what I'm talking about. But when you look at the downtown east side, so when you have somebody whose physiology has changed so badly from the drugs that their spines curve so much that they're essentially walking around hunched over like you see, because they just physically can't do anything other than that. And they have, brain damage from multiple non-fatal overdoses, coupled with underlying mental health challenges. And we think that it's humane to have them wandering in the rain and the cold and the violence that is beset upon them. It's simply not. And we need to start recognizing they can't care for themselves. And so we do need long-term secure care for them, and spread out around the province. But to get to that stage, we have a whole cohort of people, and predominantly, a lot of them are young male construction type workers that get injured, they get on an opioid for a painkiller, then they start self-medicating. We don't have voluntary care, and we need to actually have available to that people, that set of people that, for whatever reason that they've acquired an addiction, and say, yeah, I have a moment of clarity, I want to go get help, or their loved ones convince them. Right now, I can tell you as an MLA, when they phone my office, the loved one's telling me, well, my significant other wanted to go get treatment, and they were told, come back in 4 months, come back in 6 months. Phone every day at 6:55 to see if a space is open before 7 o'clock. That's simply not good enough, because they're not going to have that moment of clarity in 4 months exactly again. And so it's a slow march to downtown east side, because we know with the way the drugs are nowadays, that's what they eventually start to get hooked on, is the fentanyls and that of the world. And so we need to recognize that and have that more preventative, voluntary care as well, because if we can stop it, we know what the end point otherwise is. It's either downtown east side or it's death. Neither of those are a good consequence for that family and that loved one that's just trying to get some help and get their life back in a healthy way. And so I think we have to tackle both sides, and that's why, because it's not just one or the other. One leads to the other, but if you don't have treatment options on both ends of that spectrum, we know exactly what we're asking, or what the outcome will be.
Okay, apparently we have about 5 more minutes. So I have a question from Douglas, which is about tourism, which is one of the largest sectors in our economy. So, do you have any plans to help tourism, encourage it, increase it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the hotel industry. I wound up
That's right.
operating and owning a hotel and a full service hotel with, the bars and the restaurants and the catering and all of that. So, and Kamloops is Canada's tournament capital. So, we thrive on tourism in my part of the world. And we see the benefits that tourism can derive. And I think a lot of times, sometimes we don't appreciate how much it brings to the economy because people say, well, servers don't make that much money. Their hourly wage might not be great, but we know tips and makes a substantive difference. So it's a bit better paying of a career than people might realize.
Right.
And it does a lot more to the economy than people realize. So when I look at things like FIFA, I support soccer, I support big international events. I don't support how this government has been bringing forward now they're talking about more and more costs to it, and they can't really tell us ahead of time, which is a problem. Yet at the same time, they're not funding the Symphony of Lights this year for $1 million or
Yeah.
$2. And so when you're telling people
Frustrating.
you have $700 million plus for FIFA, but you don't have $1 or $2 million to keep Festival of Lights, which, as someone from the interior, I can tell you, people travel from around the province to come down on certain nights for Festival of Lights. Same with a lot of other attractions. And so we need to really ramp up and capitalize on that kind of festival setting of British Columbia. But we also have to really continue to develop and support and expand the people that want to come and travel British Columbia and celebrate the great uniqueness of our terrains and our various climates, various options that we have. Because a domestic traveler, someone from within BC traveling in BC, spends less money per day than somebody that's come from out of country. It's just, it's typical. You think of your own travel. If you're in a different country, you tend to spend a little bit more money than you might have if you were in Vancouver. Well, the same holds true when someone's visiting from the United States or from Europe to British Columbia. They spend more than a British Columbian does. So tourism is a vital part of our economy. You look at our restaurant sector, how many people are employed in that, and frankly, it's found money. When you
I know,
when you
and
have
it's
people,
environmentally,
yes,
pretty good.
yes, especially if they're from out of province, out of country, that's all money coming into our economy from outside sources. And so we definitely need to have a better focus on tourism. And I think it's been underutilized or undercapitalized by a government that should be desperate for economic growth.
Yeah, and look how beautiful it is here.
Mhm.
Looking at the
Yeah.
skyline of Vancouver. Okay, I have a question from John. I think we are winding down now, Peter, but John wants to know, other candidates have gone on the record to support lawful firearm owners against the federal liberal gun confiscation boondoggle. Would you enact similar legislation to Alberta and Saskatchewan to protect lawful firearm owners?
Yeah, I mean, I have my RPAL. I hunt. have no issues with guns whatsoever, and I totally agree. The buyback is misguided. I think just what everybody on any political voting spectrum is starting to realize that criminals are not going to be the ones phoning up the government and saying, "Can I get some money for my gun that I illegally own?" So I think it's a flawed policy right from the get-go. It is interesting how Alberta has worked it in terms of saying we're not going to have provincial resources or funding being tied up enforcing this. I'm not opposed to doing that either. We are governed or policed heavily by RCMP in this province, and so it gets a little bit, but Alberta is as well. And so I think we just need to send that signal that we're not prepared to instruct the RCMP to be doing this. And again, I want to be 100% clear that the gun buyback is not the reason or lack of support for the gun buyback program is not why we see gun violence happening in the Lower Mainland or around the province. Those guns, that violence needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with swiftly and with the full extent of the law. And we probably should have stiffer penalties for gun violence violations and law breaking as well. But sometimes those two get mixed together, and they really are completely different things. that we need to be clear on, and we just need to say, look, this is an overreach by government. It doesn't make any sense. Let's put the police resources to actually going after criminals than law-abiding citizens.
Okay. Now, I was asked this by someone, so I'll just ask you the question, and that was, can Peter appeal to millennials, to the younger generation? I mean, if you're elected, we need a leader who's going to be, able to attract everyone in the province.
Yep. I think I can. The polling would indicate I can. So the polling of the general public is indicating I'm the only one that can win a majority, win in the Lower Mainland, pick up seats here and on the island. And so, I have.
Which is great, by the way. I mean, it's
Yes.
better to be spread across the whole province.
Exactly. And I have adult children. I have 4 granddaughters under the age of 4. So I'm watching their struggles and their challenges and their worries about career choices in terms of, again, when I talked about earlier about do they have hope in their place of employment, or are they worried about what's going on in their place of employment? So, no, I totally understand those issues. But what they also need to see and feel is somebody at the helm that has the experience to actually deliver what they're talking about, is being honest about what they can or can't deliver, is actually being able to create that atmosphere of hope again, and of expansion, and of entrepreneurial spirit. Ultimately, that's what that age cohort is going to want to see. I firmly believe is that there is truly that optimism, and it's not about government creating every opportunity for them. It's about government setting the table of getting out of the way so that they can be their own creative best selves, and actually start a small business if they want, and realize that they have a fighting chance to actually succeed, and that they can grow in the company or the industry they're working in, that they don't go to bed at night wondering if the mill that they're working in is going to be closed in 4 months or not. That's the type of hope I think that a premier can bring to the table, which then tilts the scales to appealing to those voters. And again, I think I'm resonating because I am talking about the issues that they're actually concerned about in this leadership race.
Good point. Well, I do think we need to bring hope back to British Columbia. We need to be inspired by someone. And Peter, I think you are the one who's very inspirational. And thank you so much for spending all this time talking to us. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. And, but conversations like this one only matter if they lead to action. And the action that's required here is that you have to join the party. If you want to vote in the leadership of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, you have to be a member of the party by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
5 o'clock, April 18th, yes.
Right. And I think that's tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
You never know with the internet, though, when this gets posted. Right?
Oh, okay, right. Yes, tomorrow on the 18th. So be sure to check that out. You can do so. You can sign up at petermilobar.ca and you can join the party. And thank you so much for spending some time with us. And thank you, Peter, for taking the time out of your campaign.
Great. Thank you, Pamela, for the support, for the time yourself. And thank you to everyone for watching and taking an interest in the race. It's vitally important to have your say in this race. So make sure you buy that membership. And then over the next 4 or 5 weeks, you can continue to hear from candidates and make your final decision. But I obviously have a front runner in mind and I think you should vote for. But part of the process is people actually engaging, and that means buying a membership to stay engaged for the next 5, 6 weeks as well.
Yeah, and I think that you're very open. You covered every topic. Nothing is off the table. So I just want people to know that there was no, direction on what to ask. So this is the real Peter Milobar.
Yep. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Have a great weekend.